ladies and gentlemen, come one, come all, welcome to the 2022 Electromagnetic Universe World Expo. Today we have our guest, Tess Clark, all the way from Switzerland. She has a YouTube channel called Mythos Decoded on YouTube. Be sure to check it out and subscribe. Thank you for being here.
Hello everyone. In today's presentation, I'm going to address the subjects of the Grand Solar Minimum or an imminent little ice age, the cause and changes of the sunspot cycle and the cooling events such as the Dalton Minimum, Maunder Minimum, little ice ages and pole shifts. And if the sun is going micronova every 6,000 years, with a weakening and collapse of Earth's magnetic field in the coming decades, and if there is an imminent magnetic pole shift or reversal. Regarding the theory proposed by some about the Grand Solar Minimum by 2030 and the imminent little ice age, caused by the sun going dormant and not having any sunspot activity, some people might be correct in that the solar output might be very low by 2030. The reason they give for the coming little ice age is a second magnetic field caused by an alignment of the four gas giants, Saturn, Jupiter, Uranus, and Neptune, in 2030. And this planetary alignment was similar to that of 79 AD, which caused many catastrophes. It is interesting how they have chosen the date of 2030, which is the date of the closest approach of Bernardinelli-Bernstein to Saturn and its moons. I do suspect that the comets currently in the solar system, including two large celestial bodies, C 2017 K2 Pan-STARRS and Bernardinelli-Bernstein, are indeed discharging the solar capacitor and draining the sun's stored energy. And this is a pattern recorded in past historic records, when the Dalton and Maunder minimums can be precisely correlated to the presence of great comets and planetary interactions between Earth, Venus, Mars, and their moons. These cooling periods also seem to correlate to the 575-year orbital cycle of Earth, together with Venus, towards Jupiter. The last time we came close to Venus, Mars, and Jupiter was between 1680 and 1766 AD. The next time we close approach Venus is the year 2255, approximately in 233 years. Interestingly, the catastrophes of 79 AD were caused by a comet, and they followed a conjunction, which is an electric interaction, of Jupiter and Saturn. From Samuel Danforth's book, An Astronomical Description of the Late Comet or Blazing Star, as it appeared in New England in the 9th, 10th, 11th, and in the beginning of the 12th month in 1664. Quote, in the year 79 AD, upon a comet, while a comet was visible, followed horrible winds, an earthquake, and pestilence. Astronomers observe that comets do many times follow a conjunction of the superior planets Saturn and Jupiter. Now, regarding pole shifts, they can be of two types: magnetic pole shifts and geographic pole shifts. Magnetic pole shifts happen often. Think of the sun's 11-year sunspot cycle. When a solar cycle ends, the magnetic poles reverse, but the sun doesn't go nova or gets affected in a catastrophic way. And these magnetic reversals by themselves are not the cause of big catastrophes on Earth. We have experienced some big solar flares known as the arrows of Apollo, which caused catastrophes, including disease, plagues, and conflagrations, when in historic times Earth's orbit approached the Sun a bit too close for comfort. However, our current Sun has not been recorded as going full-blown nova by the ancients in the past records, whereas there are hints that Uranus, Saturn, Neptune, and Jupiter flared in historic times. On the other hand, a geographic pole shift is a very different animal. They can be caused by the electromagnetic influence during a close approach of a larger celestial object, including planets, comets, and gas giants. Some scientists refer to these electromagnetic interactions that tilt a planet's axis as gravitational shock waves. There could be geographic pole shifts at any time if a big enough comet or planet, known as Planet X, also known by the ancients as Wormwood, Nibiru, Destroyer, etc., came close enough to Earth and interacted electromagnetically with Earth. Think of a magnet moving a smaller metallic object. Although electromagnetically charged objects attract at a distance, they repel at close range, so they won't physically collide with each other. An axis tilt could also be caused by Earth moving to a different counter-rotating Birkeland current during Earth's elliptical orbit between the Sun and Jupiter. It is known that Earth's orbit is elliptical, and the orbit varies from the Sun's distance by 3 million miles, and this is annually. But upon studying historic records and scientific papers, it seems probable that every 575 years, Earth moves closer by more than 3 million miles towards Jupiter, encountering many comets and catastrophically close approaching Venus, Mars, and its moons, and other moons of Jupiter, including also Ceres, which is in there. As per records of cometographers, sacred text, historic records of calendar changes, a geographic axis tilt will cause huge catastrophes, ice sheet movements, raising and sinking of land masses, extreme volcanism, earthquakes, tsunamis, radiation, disease caused by noxious and poisonous gases, bacteria, living organisms, and other elements in the tails of comets, which can be seen as the reddish color of blood. For example, sulfur dioxide and iron oxide, or poisonous gases coming out from inner Earth during earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. By the way, the resulting axis tilts can vary in degree and angle, as can be seen in the work of Mario Bilreps of the Old Equator, where groups of sacred temples and pyramid bases around the world have variations in alignment to true north. And these buildings were mathematically precise, so the builders knew what they were doing. The work of historian Alan Wilson into ancient texts also points to the poles, the North Pole, having shifted several times in past historic epochs. And its place used to be, including other places, in Hudson Bay, that's Saskatchewan, currently Canada. We could see that Siberia was warmer as well. And the pole, the North Pole on the ice sheet or the ice cap, was also located in Wisconsin, United States. And another place where it has been determined that it was located was in Greenland, south of Greenland, on the Atlantic Ocean. And I believe this is also per Charles Hapgood. Now, Charles Hapgood also theorized that the melting of the ice caps is what caused the floods, but he either didn't know about the water coming from above as rain during the time of possibly Saturn going nova, or Uranus or flaring. So that's the difference on his theory regarding this. North Pole or ice sheet and crustal movement. Even though there are some catastrophic recurrent cycles, these cycles can vary due to the constant changes in the orbits of the planets of the solar system, especially when big celestial bodies or planets, seen behaving like comets, enter the solar system, such as the ones currently in the solar system. See 2014 UN 271 Bernardinelli-Bernstein, which was first categorized as a small planet, but then renamed a comet when it was seen discharging plasma, and considered the largest comet nucleus ever seen, and many times larger than Hale-Bopp. And see 2017 K2 Pan-STARRS, which is getting closer to Mars. And remember that gas giants and planets will be seen as comets when they are too close to Earth or other planets and their moons, as they will discharge the electric differential in the currents they encounter. After a geographic pole shift takes place, the magnetic pole will move to try to realign to the new geographic pole, and that is why the magnetic North Pole is currently moving. We could have had a pole shift as recently as 1540 to 1580 AD, as we will see next. By the way, the atmospheres of the planets of the solar system like Neptune and Pluto have not collapsed. The data point to heating and cooling and changes in pressure, possibly due to the electromagnetic interactions with large comets entering the solar system like K2 and Bernardinelli-Bernstein. There is no records pointing to the collapse of Earth's atmosphere in historic records. Only incoming radiation and cosmic rays during the electromagnetic interactions with planets, comets, that do not destroy all life on the planet. And there are no records that the sun went micronova 6,000 years ago, causing the great floods and other catastrophes on Earth during the time of Noah and Enoch. However, there are historic records worldwide that point to the possibility of Uranus and Saturn flaring and causing two great floods, one at the time of the death of the patriarch Enoch, and one during the lifetime of the patriarch Noah. And Earth was too far from the sun at that point, according to the solar system models of the Pythagorean astronomers. And there have been other floods that caused the end of the Bronze Age during the life of King Dardanus, as told in Plato's Timaeus and Critias, known as the sinking of Atlantis, sometime between 1300 and 1100 BC, which was also accompanied by many catastrophes, including an axis tilt. Of course, changes in the plasma filament feeding the sun's Birkeland currents influence Earth and all the planets in the solar system. But as you know, Jupiter also exerts great influence on the inner planets, including Earth, and ancient historic records of natural philosophers, cometographers, and science and other scientific papers point to this. Noah Webster was an author of dissertations on the English language, including the Webster Dictionary and several other works. He was a member of the Connecticut Academy of Arts and Sciences, of the Society for the Promotion of Agriculture, Arts and Manufactures in the state of New York, of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and corresponding member of the Historical Society in Massachusetts. In pages 304 and 305 of his book, A Brief History of Epidemic and Pestilential Diseases, with the principal phenomena of the physical world, which precede and accompany them, and observations deduced from the facts stated, Webster discusses the electric universe at length. Quote, "The influence of the electricity incoming from the moon during the day may excite or cause fever in the human body. During the night, a subduction of excitement in the atmosphere may induce debility and favor or facilitate the invasion of disease and the approach of death. These are mere hints and conjectures intended to excite investigation. With respect to the supposed influence of comets on the elements of this globe, Earth, I would remark that on the principles here suggested, that influence is very clearly proved and may be easily understood. The facts stated demonstrate that the sun and moon exert great powers on the globe, the Earth, and the fact that earthquakes mostly happen during certain positions of the moon prove that the medium of her influence is the electric principle. Now, comets are known to be of various magnitudes or sizes. Some of them are as large as Venus, much larger than the moon, with highly electrified atmospheres, and sometimes approaching nearer to the Earth. The comet of 1577 came within less than 1 million of miles distance. Those comets, which pass the system at an immense distance from the Earth, can have no greater influence. And my note is that according to the work of many physicists and astrophysicists, including Andrew Hall, if we connect to the electric currents of comets, then there is an interaction and could cause catastrophes. But others approaching near produce tremendous effects. Therefore, during the proximity to the Earth, the number and violence of earthquakes and volcanic discharges or eruptions, storms, inundations from rains, and extraordinary tides, and most sensible changes in the qualities, quantity, size, and mutations of animal and vegetable and plant life. That such are the effects is proven not only by the concurring opinions of all the ancient philosophers, who were accurate observers of nature, but by one uniform series of historical evidence for more than 2,000 years. On the principles of electricity, which is disturbed, attracted, repelled, and modified in its combinations with other substances, by the approach of distant bodies, the solution of the phenomena is easy and philosophical. But by the great principle of action, electricity, indeed the discovery of the fact that most earthquakes happen under particular phases of the moon, and that volcanic eruptions are obviously affected by her position in her orbit, seems to place this point beyond question. It seems then to be very certain that the electricity which exists in and around the Earth is influenced by the sun, moon, and planets, but especially by the larger comets which pass near the Earth. The influence of these bodies, or the celestial laws of the universe, disturb this fluid and vary its distribution and its combinations with other substances. Previous to earthquakes, volcanic discharges, and hurricanes, it is evident from many phenomena already enumerated, the electricity of the Earth passes out of it through the crust in unusual quantities, so it gets amped up. And as the air is often a bad conductor, the fluid, water, accedes to it and carries along the water upon the surface and within the bowels of the Earth, underground water. This process continues for some weeks and months, exhausts and dries out all the rivers and springs. The atmosphere, in the meantime, becomes more and more dry and a worse conductor, until both air and earth become perfectly electric and non-conductors. In this situation, either a great demand for the fluid or water in some distant region, or a great accumulation of it in the bowels of the Earth, has prepared the way for a sudden explosion. but no conducting medium exists sufficient to convey it or to allow it. A fall of rain at this time may create that medium. And then the common fact that earthquakes happen soon after rain, succeeding or after severe drought. If no rain falls, the fluid accumulates until it forces a passage through the great apertures such as clefts and openings formed for that purpose. And the volcanic mountains, volcanoes, setting fire on its way to the hydrogen and other inflammable substances, which the ocean generates or deposits in their bosoms. I know not that these conclusions are just or correct, but the facts from which I reason are indisputable. The uncommon discharges of electricity previous to these great conclusions are indicated not only by the exhaustion of streams and springs, but by many phenomena in the atmosphere, showing it to be highly electrified. Meteors, huge globes of fire shoot through the air, not only after but before eruptions. Witness the meteors of 1758, 1762, and one in May 1783. Mentioned in the preceding history. And Sir William Hamilton tells us that the air was unusually charged with electricity some days before the eruption of 1794. Unusual halos and moxons, fiery and luminous appearances in the heavens, with extraordinary tempests, hurricanes, tornadoes, and hail are evidence of the same fact. The sun is probably the great electric of the system, which excites into action the heat of the atmosphere and the earth." End quote. More on the electric universe continues. From 1580 until 1583 AD, multiple comets were recorded, earthquakes, plagues or disease, pests, plagues or insects and rodents. Severe storms took place in 1583 to 1585. As a result, a new calendar called the Gregorian Calendar began in October 1582. Interestingly, there are several maps from between 1154 AD and 1556 AD that depict south at the top of the map, south referring to Antarctica or the South Pole, including the Islamic map Tabula Rogeriana from 1154 AD, which was one of the most complete maps of the earth, of the world in that time. The Cagnito map of 1402 AD, the Tabola di Vele map of 1430 AD, and Nicolas de Silen's map from 1556 AD, and early Chinese maps of the same period. The Gregorian calendar was introduced by Pope Gregory XIII. He recruited astronomers to recalculate the year and revise the calendar. The solar calendar, now in general use, was introduced by Gregory XIII in 1582 to correct the Julian calendar by suppressing or removing 10 days, making October 5th be October 15th. It was adopted by Great Britain and the American colonies in 1752. Also, ice buildup in Greenland that has not melted in many hundreds of years covered many medieval settlements. Comets can be rocky planetary bodies of various sizes within the solar system with elliptical orbits, including planets with stable orbits that go out of the regular orbits, or rogue planetary bodies that can get captured by the solar heliopause with hyperbolic orbits, which can be as large or larger than the Moon and Venus. The ancients all over the world, including the Pythagorean astronomers, knew comets were signs of impending doom and catastrophes, including cosmic geomagnetic pole shifts. And cometographers and historians recorded in their chronicles that their appearance in the heavens brought war as a result, concurrent with sudden cooling, harvest failure, and resulting famines, disease, and pandemics. The etymology of influenza means disease, influence of the stars, which included radiation sickness, genetic mutations, known as the Ebner effect, caused by radiation or by the comet's electric currents, seen as extreme lightning or thunderbolts. And these thunderbolts cause electric fires, craters, canyons, and vitrification of sand, rock, and living matter. High electrification of the atmosphere, St. Elmo's fire, which in turn dries out the bodies of water and causes droughts in certain areas, while other parts of Earth experience great floods due to incoming water in the tails of comets. Electric currents can also cause instant fossilization, petrification of people, animals, and vegetation. Mass madness in people or animals due to electromagnetic frequencies, as well as bacteria, parasites, fungi. For example, the ergot poisoning of the medieval times in bread. Droughts, famines, and sometimes cannibalism and earthquakes. Raining of fish, frogs, or pieces of meat. Raining of elements such as sand, microdiamonds, sulfur dioxide, or iron oxide in the tails of comets that look like blood. Literal raining fire from the clouds and pillars, or tornadoes of fire and conflagrations caused by a combination of electric fires coming from the thunderbolts, but also arcs of lightning exiting the Earth's crust through anodes and cathodes, as described by Andrew Hall's Electric Earth. Or combustible hydrocarbons and other elements coming down also with meteors. Falling spherules and stones, fireballs and meteor showers, moxons, cigar-shaped combustibles, edible dew that tastes like honey, called manna, gelatinous radioactive material falling from the sky. The superabundance of electricity seemed to cause lethargy, delirium, madness, and depression in humans and animals. Glowing plasma balls or material and phenomena related to the comet that some people think that were UFOs, deafening or strange sounds and shock waves, severe and unseasonable weather, megastorms, red auroras, and other plasma phenomena like sprites, gnomes, jets, ghosts, noctilucent clouds, etc. due to the plasma tails of the comets interacting with the Bergland currents of the Sun and of the Earth. Extreme volcanism, darkening of the skies, dimming of the Sun and the Moon turning red, severe winters, floods, tsunamis, rivers reversing their course, terraforming, misery and death, which would lead to war, invasions, migrations, and the rise and fall of kingdoms due to the weakening of the masses and populations. And that was known as the New World Order. These fears were not based on superstition, but rather based on repeated sequence of events and phenomena that appeared within a year before or after the sighting of a large comet. Until recent historic times, the importance of the electric interactions of comets with Earth and the Sun, and the historic descriptions of eyewitness reports was conveniently forgotten or ignored, and has been the biggest secret ever kept from humanity. The sources I quote from are of phenomena mostly recorded in Europe and in some British colonies. So there are also records of catastrophes in other parts of the world that are not included in this presentation. The calamities and changes caused by comets and cosmic weather have always been blamed on humanity and used by enemy tribes and religions to have populations join in wars like the Crusades to fight their enemies, or Protestantism and the Inquisition. Wars have been a form of human sacrifice, like in France in 1550, when a comet appeared. 300 innocent people, called heretics, were burned at the stake in order to appease heaven, just as it was done by the Minoans, sacrificing men and women in order to appease the bull of heaven, which was the comet or planet seen, including Venus and Neptune. During the 15th and 16th centuries, the Inquisition killed hundreds of thousands of innocent people. Many were women who knew the art of healing with plants, who were pagans or not of the Catholic faith, under the guise of witchcraft, and were blamed for the deaths caused by the plagues and pandemics. These women were put through horrendous trials that turned their own families and towns against them, or were then accused, and the accused was tortured in order to extract a confession, and things like a birthmark on the body or bleeding upon being pricked would show proof of being a witch. Pestilence or plague can include measles, influenza, smallpox, yellow fever, cholera, distemper, and many other diseases that seem to be related to poisons and radiation sickness brought in with the comet's tail. During the last 1,000 years, extreme cooling, or what is known as the Little Ice Age, began around 1290 and lasted until 1370. The other cooling period began in 1500 and lasted until the 1850s. But historians say that the worst deaths due to the highest cooling period happened around 1683, just at the time we approach Venus in 1680 AD. We're going to concentrate in the 7th century and take a look at history now. Historians estimate that across the 17th century, an average of 38,000 people left Europe from English ports, not counting the people emigrating from Spain and France, desperately escaping Europe, which for much of the 17th century was in a state of persistent crisis due to cruel witch hunting and religious persecutions, civil wars, plagues, recurrent crop failures, and famines that accompanied the Little Ice Age. For centuries, the Spanish and British crown would offer desperate peoples from all over Europe during the times of famines and pestilence free passage to the Americas and other colonies, in exchange for either indented servitude, joining the army, or getting indebted in exchange for useless land to cultivate, and having to pay back a certain amount of money after a few years. Unfortunately, many emigrants suffered greatly upon arriving in the New World, and these were our ancestors. As many calamities caused by the same comets also affected the American continent, including Australia. Piracy in the Caribbean began in the 1500s, but it reached its peak during the mid-1660s, and it lasted until the 18th century. Whenever a war was declared in Europe between the great powers, the result was always widespread piracy and privateering throughout the Caribbean. Piracy, also called privateers, were considered legal by the perpetrators of England, France, and Netherlands. The Caribbean had become the center of European trade and colonization after Columbus, a Sephardic merchant from Spain, had arrived in 1492 together with many crypto-Jews who were fleeing religious persecution in Spain during the Inquisition. In 1493, the Treaty of Tordesillas and the Papal Bull gave Spain control over the Americas and allowed the exploitation of the natives and all resources in the continent, including precious metals, mined or pillaged from ancient sacred sites. The Pope declared that, like women, the natives of America had no soul and were barbaric, uncivilized creatures. In 1600s, earthquakes occurred in England and in Arequipa, Peru, accompanied by volcanic eruptions. The comets of 1597 and 1599 caused severe droughts, failure of crops for many years, and the largest and most severe famines during this period. In the 1600s, in Moscow, the famine raged for 3 years, together with pandemics and disease. Parents devoured their dying children. Cats, rats, and every unclean creature was used to sustain life. All the ties of nature and morality were disregarded. Human flesh was exposed for sale in the open market. The more powerful seized the neighbors, fathers and mothers, their children, husbands, their wives, and offered them for sale. Multitudes of dead bodies were found, with their mouths filled with straw and the most filthy substances. 500,000 persons were calculated to have died in Moscow by famine and pestilence. At the time, the famine in Livonia and the cold winter of 1602 claimed 30,000 lives. The dead bodies lay in the streets because there were not enough survivors to bury them. In 1603, disease killed 36,000 in London. 2,000 a week died in Paris. An Etna volcano erupted in Italy. Extreme drought and fires in England during the 2 previous years caused the Church in 1654 to order public thanks, to ask God for a supply of rain. In America, from Magnalia, Book 4, page 156, quote, "This drought was also followed by deadly disease, and the legislature of Connecticut in October 1662 appointed a day of thanksgiving for 2 reasons: the abatement of the sickness in the country and a supply of rain in the time of drought." End quote. So this is the origin of Thanksgiving in America. The year 1680 was especially bad due to a severe winter and the appearance of the comet that had also appeared during Justinian's reign, which caused a Justinian plague that killed half of the world's population. In 531, the resplendent comet appeared, whose revolution is fixed at 575 years, supposed to be the same comet or the planet Venus, which was visible in the year 44 BC, after the death of Julius Caesar, and it is recorded in August coin and Temple of the Comet star as an 8-pointed star, which was the symbol of Venus. There is ongoing debate amongst scientists about if the whole planet was colder during the so-called Little Ice Ages, because, for example, in the town of Nunalek in Alaska, southwest Alaska, what it's nowadays, new archaeological evidence shows that the people living around the 1570s AD were doing pretty well. People living in small settlements and using caribou leather skins and eating seals and other product from the ocean. And it seems that they lasted until 1645 or 1675. And they probably left the site due to tsunamis or catastrophes during the time of comets. So that shows that they were actually surviving, and compared to the rest of Europe, which actually was where the ice sheet probably moved to during the times of excessive cooling, and the weather around the earth could have been different. Let's see, in Europe in the 1640s, England's revolution in 1640 and 1689, Spain wars with Europe and debt problems, Italian peasant uprising and protest, fall of the Ming and rise of the Qing dynasties in China, succession crisis in the Ottoman Empire, wars between natives and colonists in America, Mongol Wars of Succession, the 30-Year War in 1617 to 18, 12 volcanic eruptions between 1638 and 1644 darkened skies and cooled the earth. It was so cold in 1642 that the bay in Massachusetts froze. Drought in Indonesia the same year caused rice harvest failure and famines. Droughts in 1640 and 1644 in Africa, while severe flooding inundated the Netherlands. And Scandinavia recorded its coldest winter ever in 1641. In China, in 1640s, 50% of rice harvest failed. It was all related to the passing of big celestial objects and the orbital changes of Earth. So war and disease also reduce the population. And during the time of these calamities and suffering, there were religious schisms and infighting within religions, just like the Protestants separating from the Christians, and Sabbatai Zevi trying to get a following of his own, and then finally converting into Islam. Religious people like Sabbatai Zevi and others during this time of 1664, 1665, 1666, where there was a lot of conflagrations, disasters, famines, and they would say the end of the world is coming soon, so you better convert to the religion of whatever this person was supposed to be, the Messiah or Savior. And including King Louis XVI also said, I am Jupiter and I am the sun. He was called the Sun King. That's what he wanted people to call him, when Jupiter was actually electrically interacting with some of these comets. And this would be the time that we were closest to Jupiter as well, so maybe we could see Jupiter even closer to Earth, and that's why he said, I am Jupiter. And the 1666 fire in London, the Great Fire, was caused by these comets as well. And it's really interesting because during the lifetime of Louis XVI, when he said, I am Jupiter, that was at the time when his court astronomers spotted the electric interactions with these comets and Jupiter. And soon after, the red great spot of Jupiter was also seen. So it was one of these comets that caused this storm. And there was also a black dark spot also seen by astronomers for the first time around 1690 AD. To conclude, comets and planets interacting with and connecting to Earth's magnetosphere and electric tails is a common and recurring event, unfortunately, as can be seen in the records of natural philosophers and cometographers throughout written history. And it seems to be part of the natural cycle of life and evolution. Due to the unpredictable electromagnetic interactions with planets and other comets, changing the orbits of comets, knowing the exact date and time catastrophes will take place is almost impossible. It is very hard to know the type, severity, and the extent of the catastrophes or the geographic areas that will be affected during these events, including axis tilts, orbital changes, and mini ice ages. While the whole of the planet might suffer from severe unseasonable weather, some geographic areas could experience droughts, fires, earthquakes, tsunamis, extreme volcanism, while other areas might suffer flooding, megastorms, tornadoes, and unseasonable weather, landmass changes, ice sheet movements, and disease. We also have to take into account all the nuclear reactors around the world that are melting. And because we don't have accounts of the whole Earth to compare during the exact same periods, we cannot tell if only the northern or southern hemispheres were colder. However, if we pay attention to historic records and learn what are the signs to look for and compare them to what is happening around us, it could be a clue of what is to come. And that ends my presentation for today. May peace and the force be with you all.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for checking out Tess Clark. Be sure to check her out on Mythos Decoded on Facebook and Mythos Decoded on social media as well as YouTube and other platforms. We'll see you on the next presentation. Thank you for tuning in.